Hey, good evening. Happy New Year, I guess is what we say. It's almost Easter in January. It's just right around the corner. Uh-huh. Oh. Yeah, I think you need to change the batteries in the Bible. Yeah. It shouldn't have changed where you're sitting. There, we have new lights for the stage. If anything, they're brighter. So I don't know. I don't know. We haven't changed anything in terms of the house lighting. Oh no, they're much brighter. They're actually much brighter. Yeah, yeah, they're much brighter. Sorry about that, Gene. All right. Good evening. We're back in Job. Happy New Year and all that. We on the schedule. We were going to be in Job 25, and when I did the schedule, I'm sure I had a really brilliant reason as to why I just wanted to do Job 25. But if you look in your Bible, Job 25 is a relatively brief section. Yeah, and if needed, I could turn that into plenty of, there's plenty to talk about in there, but looking at the rest of the book, Job's next speech is 6 chapters, I think, something like that. There's really no reason. So by moving chapter 26 to tonight, for the rest of our study, we'll just, I think, if I remember right in the schedule, just be in one chapter each week for the until we get to, I think, the last Wednesday of April is our last. The 3rd of May we're meeting. Perfect. So the first Wednesday of May. So we'll be in chapters 25 and 26, and let's open in prayer, and then we'll get reoriented for where we are in the book of Job. God, we thank you for this evening. We thank you for your word that we have the opportunity to read and know, and our prayer is that your Holy Spirit would do the work of showing our hearts and minds what your word means, and especially how we should put it into practice in our lives. And how we can worship you because we know you better. In Jesus' name, amen. All right, just as a way of reminder, because it's been a few weeks anyway since we've talked about the book of Job. I just wanted to remind you of how the book is put together, just really, really briefly, so that we can reorient where we are in the book itself. So the book of Job has 3 major sections. The first section is the introduction, so to speak. It sets the stage for the rest of the middle section of the book. So in the beginning, we discover who Job is. He's a man of the East. He's very, very wealthy. He has lots of children and a wife and lots of camels and donkeys and servants and whatnot. Very important person. We also discover that there was a conversation that took place in heaven between Satan, the accuser, and God. Job is described as righteous by God, and Satan accuses Job of only worshiping the Lord because God has paid him off with camels, and then he accuses God of paying off Job to buy worshipers. And so he says to God, if you get rid of his stuff, he'll curse you, and if you get rid of his health, he'll curse you, and all that. So then Satan goes out and kills all of his children, takes all of his livestock and stuff, and most of his servants are killed. So that's the first major section of the book, is these terrible things happen to Job. Oh, and also he has these pussy sores all over his body. I forgot to mention that. We must remember the pussy sores, which over the course of time become infected. Because one of his speeches, if you remember, he talks about the fact that his sores have become inflamed. They're hot, and their skin is turning dark. So likely his sores have become infected, and he's also not eating a lot. So at a certain point, he says he's skin and bones. So he's probably losing a lot of weight. At the end of that, he says, I came into the world naked. I'm going to leave the world naked. Blessed be the name of the Lord, or something like that. So there you go. He doesn't curse the Lord or hold God that God had any wrongdoing. So that's the first section. The second section is most of the book. It's the conversations between Job and Bildad, Zophar, and Eliphaz. And that's the second major section of the book. The final section is the conclusion as to what happens. And we can include in the conclusion what God has to say, or we can sort of tag that on to the end of the conversations. And the conclusion then really is just the last chapter or two where there is the result of the conversations. And so the end is the shortest section of the book. The middle section, the majority of the book, these conversations are, again, in three major sections where each person talks once. Each person talks, but Job replies to each. So Bildad talks, then Job replies. Then Zophar talks, then Job replies. And then Eliphaz talks. Job replies. This happens 3 times. We're in the third section of that. So right now we're in the third section of these conversations. Bildad here is giving his final speech. And if you remember, now I can't remember if it's Zophar or Eliphaz. I think it's Zophar. In the third section, it's a little bit different because the third guy, I think Zophar, he doesn't have a speech. He only goes twice. Yeah, but he's a little different. Yeah, not one of the 3 friends, 3 amigos, 3 stooges, I guess we might say, right? So Bildad is going to speak. So why do I bring this up? Because I didn't know if you realize this or not. We're kind of at the end. So Bildad is going to speak for, 8 verses or 6 verses, whatever it is. Job's speech is his final one. We're starting that tonight. Chapter 26 starts his final speech, but I didn't look it up. Was it 6 chapters? It might go to chapter 32. Yeah, so Job is going to speak for the rest. So this is the longest single speech in the book of Job. It's longer than God's speech at the end. It's longer than, I think, Elihu is the young man who talks just before God in the end. So it's the longest speech. So we'll be covering Job because we'll look at the first chapter of it tonight, chapter 26, and then we'll do 1 chapter each week. So we'll be hearing from Job for a few weeks, probably, a month? Yeah, so 4 or 5 weeks it goes. You can look that up. And then when we get to the end of Job's speech, he's done talking, other than a little bit of conversation with God when he's speaking. So now we kind of know. So maybe you're thinking, man, this book is really starting to plod along and it's getting a little repetitious. We all agree, and so Bildad's done. And in fact, his short section tonight, he doesn't really say anything new. Most of what he said. So thankfully, these guys are done because they've run out of material. They don't have really anything else to bring to the table. Yeah, his theology of how he sees people and how he sees God is interesting. So let's get into that. In fact, that was sort of my note I made, which is this is more of what we have seen before. Most of what Bildad has to say in these verses is repetition. And again, the main thing we see from these friends when they're talking to Job is what they have to say. I mean, if you were to just read this, if you just put this in a Hallmark card, well, it's true. There's nothing wrong with what he has to say. It's how he's applying it to Job's situation in the manner in which the truth is being used. What's that? Well, we'll get to that. Okay, so what we'll do is we'll look at, that has to do with the application, comparing to man to maggots, we'll get to it. Because that's the last verse, isn't it? Well, let's start at the beginning, just for this one time. All right. Let me read it. Chapter 25. Bildad the Shuhite. This is the last chance to make that joke, right? Shortest man in the Bible. Moving on. Bildad the Shuhite answered and said, Dominion and fear are with God. He makes peace in his high heaven. Is there any number to his armies? Upon whom does his light not rise? How then can man be in the right before God? How can he who is born of women be pure? Behold, even the moon is not bright, and the stars are not pure in his eyes. How much less man, who is a maggot, and the son of man, who is a worm. It's kind of rough, tough end. So remember, Bildad is sort of responding to Job's charge. There's a couple of things that Job wants in regard to his situation. He's called in the past for an audience with God. He wants to have God give an answer as to why all this stuff is going on. And so Job wants God to stand before him and give him a hearing. And Job has claimed that if he had a hearing, he would come out of that blameless. That's his argument. He also wants God to account for what's going on. He doesn't have any question as to whether or not he's blameless, but he wants to sort of evaluate for himself whether or not he thinks God's idea was a good one or not. And then Bildad is responding to that. He said, who could stand before God? Let's keep in mind, Job, who it is that you want to have a conversation with. So in the one sense, Bildad is right. There's this, what does the Bible say in Proverbs? The beginning of wisdom is the fear of the Lord. Yeah, so in some sense, what Bildad has to say can be helpful, but we have to remember Job's situation and Bildad's primary view on the situation, which is if Job is suffering, therefore Job must have sinned. And so that's where he's approaching this. So look, verse 2. He declares that God has sovereignty and power. So dominion and fear are with God. That means if God is somewhere, God's in charge, and God is everywhere. So dominion and fear are with God. So Bildad's opinion is in relation to Job wanting to have an audience with God or wanting to be considered blameless before God. God is in charge everywhere, and in fact, everywhere God is, he is in charge and ought to be feared. There should be a sense of trembling. Is there anything wrong with that? But on the flip side, would you say to somebody who is really going through a hard time like Job, I'm just really seeking the Lord. I just want to have a better idea of what's going on here. And do you think it's good counsel to tell them, well, I don't know if I would do that. God's in charge and he should be feared. I don't know if you should talk to God about it. That sounds terrible. I would hope we would encourage one another to seek the Lord. But he is using this concept of God's dominion and fearfulness as a means to convince Job to stop asking for an audience with God. And it's really terrible. God makes peace in heaven. So there is peace in heaven. Now, who was in heaven with God? The devil. Yeah, Jesus, obviously, the Son at this point in history, but the devil. So when the devil is in heaven, is there less peace? No. The devil has no ability to upset the peaceful waters of God's heaven. There's absolutely no ability for the devil to get in there and kind of rustle things up. We've mentioned this before when God always had a plan with Job, and the devil didn't come in, and God wasn't opportunistic. This was always the plan. And that God wasn't trying to solve a problem. The devil's given me a quandary I need to figure out. The devil was buffoonish to be able to walk right into God's plan and fit the bill perfectly. And so God makes peace in heaven because he has dominion and power and might. No one can disturb God. No one can disturb God, not only in heaven, but anywhere. God's well-being is uncompromised. God can also have emotions related to relationship, especially with sinful people like us, without being disturbed in his peace. So that's a little bit hard for us to understand. So when we experience relational brokenness, we have all kinds of anxiety and sadness and loss, and a lot of times we'll think about things that are broken, especially in relationships. If this would finally get to working better, I think my life would be okay. So if this one thing were sort of better, then I think everything would be okay. God never has to think that because everything is okay. He can even experience our sinfulness, which generates in him both sadness and all these kind of things but that doesn't do to him the same way that it affects us. We get sort of undone sometimes when things go bad, and we say things like, I don't know how I'm going to make it, and if it's going to stay like this, I don't know what's going to happen. Well, God's never in that position. He's always doing as good as he possibly can, which that, of course, for us, maybe that doesn't make sense, but that's the way God is. Let's look at verse 3. Bildad describes God's armies. He says, is there any number to his armies? So, I don't know, maybe there is a number to his armies. There might be a lot, but, frankly, it doesn't matter. Yeah, he doesn't really need an army. Yeah, so the statement here is not so much a description, does God have a large enough army to conquer a foe? Because that was a real common way of viewing military might really prior to the Industrial Revolution. We're used to think of military might primarily around technology, who has the best weaponry. Most of history, military might was how many soldiers do you have, and some technology like iron chariots and horses and these sorts of things. But primarily, it's just how many people do you have? And so he's talking about God's ability to be unconquerable. So God has a force that is can't even be opposed. And in fact, to Gene's point, Gene says, well, he doesn't even need an army. At the end of the book, Revelation, Jesus comes and he has an army with him, right? He's got a bunch of people on horses and whatnot, and he defeats the bad guys, I think. And how does he do that? He just speaks. Yeah, the word, he just speaks, and they're gone. So the army is not necessary. They're sort of, window dressing, I guess. Come on, guys, watch this. And so, but this is a nice way of recognizing God's unconquerability. And it's not even close. It's not even sort of, boy, if we could just raise a few more million men or something like this. Or even the angelic realm. Even if Satan could sort of somehow figure out to have more demonic power. It's not even close. All of the evil forces in the universe, and they don't compare at all with what God has. But that being said, God does have a host. There are angels, and they are described sometimes in military terms. You look in the book of Daniel, some of the most interesting descriptions of angels. You have one angel coming to answer Daniel because he got hung up in Persia and was trying to help out Michael, and somebody left their keys at home, and I don't remember all that. but there's a lot of things going down, and the explanation was, here's why it took me 21 days to get here and answer your prayer. Because I got hung up with Michael and Persia and this other stuff. So God does have a host, and it's large. Even the angelic host that showed up for the shepherds, there seemed to be quite a few of them. Elisha and his servant saw a host of God's forces surrounding the city. Remember, that's where Elisha said, there are more with us than are with them. And so God does have a host, but they're not necessary. But Bildad here catches on this. He says he can't be conquered. And so for us, maybe sitting here in this moment, we might say, "Oh, that's kind of cool." But remember, he's saying this to try and convince Job he shouldn't confront God with the reality of his suffering. So remember, God is unconquerable. Why would you want to have an audience with this guy? Look what else. He says, "Upon whom does his light not arise?" So this is a way of saying God's light is everywhere. God sees everything. God knows everything. There is no place to hide from God. So not only is he unconquerable, in a war, if a war is going to be won based on intelligence, God is going to win that too. That was a big factor in most wars. There's intelligence and then there's counterintelligence. One of my favorite aspects of looking at some wars, especially movies that involve sort of spies, is this idea of putting out false information, hoping that the enemy picks it up. And this was a really, really important tactic for D-Day, putting out lots of false information to try and convince the Germans that we're going to invade elsewhere. They had inflatable tanks and planes. Have you seen those, heard about that? So that if they flew spy planes over, they would see, oh, the planes are all still here. They're not gone. And I don't know if that worked or not, but it was a good idea. I hope the Germans were fooled by balloons. That just seems fair. Yeah, you had Churchill. Okay, well you can, yeah. Never given. So this idea is get out this intelligence and counterintelligence, trying to convince your enemy you're doing this, and then you do that, and it's a game of chess, really. And with God, that's a silly game. He knows everything you're up to, and he knows it more thoroughly than you know it. And so there's no place that God doesn't shine. He knows everything about the enemy, everything about those who would oppose him. And so to try and oppose God either with military might or a sense of intelligence and strategy makes no sense. So therefore, Job stopped praying. Job, why would you want to have audience with God? Why would you want to seek God's face if you know? Now, why does Bildad think Job is God's enemy? What's that? Ralph, because of all the stuff that is happening to him. So therefore, since all this stuff happened to him, Job he's done something terrible, so therefore he's an enemy of God. And so therefore, he shouldn't seek God's face because look what God does to his enemies. He can't be opposed. Now, are sinners enemies of God? Yes, they are. That's the primary definition of being a sinner, is to be in rebellion against God. If someone rebels against God, will they have victory? No. But Bildad here has completely missed the point. Number one, he's missed the point that suffering can happen to people who aren't in rebellion. He's missed that point. He's completely lost on him the idea that a good person could have suffering in their life. He doesn't have a category for that. And secondly, he has no category for God, who would seek relationship with a sinner through redemptive means. That God would take an enemy and make him a friend. That he doesn't have any understanding of that. At the end of the book, he's going to get a big picture of that when Job is called to pray for Bildad. So that'll shift. But those two things, since he thinks all suffering is done by rebellious sinners, and since God would never seek redemptive relationship with a sinner, he therefore is really encouraging Job to, probably the best cause for you would be to avoid God. That would be what you really need to do. So really, again, these are things, I wouldn't mind if you looked at these verses and could sort of pull them out of the context of what he's doing to his friend Job. These are actually really helpful verses. I like the idea in remembering that God is unconquerable. I think that's really, really important. I don't like the idea of convincing people to leave God alone because he's unconquerable. I think that's a terrible piece of advice. All right, let's keep going. Verse 4, because we have 12 chapters to do tonight, or at least one more. So how can man be made right before God? So if there's a dispute between you and God is not conquerable, and God knows everything, it would be a fool's errand to oppose God. So if there's a dispute, if you have an issue with God, now has anybody ever had an issue with God? Yeah, just on weekdays and weekends. Really God. That's one of my favorite prayers. Really God, we're doing this. Okay, all right, I don't get it. So that's where Job is. He wants an audience with God so he can figure this out. And what Bildad is saying is, since you have an issue with God, and since God is unconquerable and he knows everything, it's a fool's errand to go before God and seek his favor, because God cannot be opposed. So the only way to sort of have victory in this sort of situation is to avoid God. So Bildad describes who can be right before God, and what's the correct answer? Romans 3:23. All have sinned, all fall short of the glory of God. Isaiah tells us there are none righteous, no, not one. How can he who is born of women be pure? Now, this isn't a knock on women. It's just people who are born. That's just all he's saying. It's figure of speech. He's doing poetry here. So since no person could stand before God and make a comprehensive defense of their actions, their behavior, or even their nature, having been born into the sinful world, the best option is to try to avoid conflict with God. Which, again, this is a silly thing, because he's being somewhat contradictory. Because God knows everything. So what are the odds? What is someone's ability to avoid God? You don't have that ability. And the book of Hebrews, I think, says, is appointed for man. And no one can become right. So it's a silly argument. Mostly what he wants Job to do is stop asking God for reasons. Suck it up, buttercup. Admit you're a bad person, and hope God is nice to you. And it's kind of frustrating. Verse 5, Bildad's argument continues, even the moon is not bright and the stars are not pure in his eyes. So he continues discussing this notion of who can stand before God, and now mentions creation. Well, it's tough to know. It's a poem. Here's how I'm taking it, and I'm open to input. I think what he's trying to get at, same with Job and anybody else. Anybody who stands before God is not going to look righteous. So you've got God, who is perfectly righteous and holy. And so anyone, including creation, if you put the moon next to God, it's not going to look righteous. It's not going to look holy. It's going to look ruined. You put stars next to God, you're like, oh, those stars they're not working right. Because next to God, everything's going to look like it's been, the fancy word for it is desecrated. Yeah, anything next to God is going to, that's something's wrong with that when I look at it next to God. So the sense is anything compared with God is not holy. But here's where this misses the mark just a little bit. Now, on the one hand, he's accurate. When when humans sinned, we not only brought a curse on ourselves, separation from God, we died spiritually, and then all of us die physically at some point. But that curse also affected the created order. It affected how we can grow crops. It affected our relationships. It affected our health, all these kinds of things. And we know it affected the created order even beyond the world, because in Revelation, there's going to be a new heavens and a new earth. So it's a remaking of the created world, because sin has, in fact, done something. I don't know what it's done to stars. I don't know what it did to stars, but it's broken and needs to be remade. But here's the thing, though. In 1 Corinthians 15, we're not going to turn there. 1 Corinthians 15, Paul, and it's one of the most important chapters in your Bible. So if you haven't read it recently, you should read it. He's discussing the resurrection. That has the famous verse in it: if Christ isn't raised from the dead, we're idiots. So even if Jesus is who he said he is, and he died on the cross, and he brings forgiveness, if he didn't raise from the dead, then you're only made righteous for this life, and when you die, you stay dead. And so your salvation is basically useless. And so the resurrection is critically important for our salvation, because we need to be able to live in this salvation forever. So Jesus is raised. In that, Paul describes different things. He compares humans with angels. And this is how he says it. You can look it up later. He says people have one kind of glory, right? And then angels, they have another kind of glory. So if a person stands next to an angel, we're not going to look the same. They both have glory because God made them, but it's different kinds of glory. So so Bildad, though, doesn't see it that way. If you're not God, you're desecrated. But Paul helps us here. He says, no, you can not be God and still have glory. It's just not the same kind of glory. Now, what's really cool about being in Christ is it says that we will one day have glory as Christ does. So it's pretty incredible that God takes this creation that's below angels and makes us share the glory of Christ. So that's kind of incredible. But so what Bildad misses is there is some sense in being a person made in the image of God that we have glory that God has bestowed because of what he did. It's not because we have glory in ourselves, it's because God made us. And so what he is saying is the moon is not bright and the stars are not bright in his eyes. And again, what's the argument to Job? Well, what are you going to do before God? You're nothing. You're nothing. You don't have anything to offer. Maybe the way of saying it, you don't have any glory now, and in fact, you're a sinner because, look, you're suffering. Once you're standing next to God, it's going to be even worse. Now, you won't be arguing, because once you stand next to God, there won't be anything left to say. You'll realize your sinfulness. Now, in some sense, that's true, but Bildad is taking it too far because he's trying to maintain that brokenness between God and Job. Okay, last verse. This is the one Diana was talking about. How much less a man who is a maggot? How much less a man who is a maggot, the son of man who is a worm? How much less a maggot or a worm who could stand next to God? I don't know if you encounter maggots. I don't encounter maggots a lot. I don't have a lot of dead animals showing up. But that's generally where you find them, right? In a dead animal, you'll find maggots. You've got some maggots? Right. You got maggots. Yeah. Now, were you overly concerned with the well-being of the maggots? No, you wanted them out. The sooner they were out and maybe incinerated, the better. No reference to hell intended. But this is how Bildad is considering Job if he's going to stand by God. Now, I don't know. You'd have to ask Bildad if he views all. I think, knowing Bildad's theology, does he view all people as maggots? I think he primarily wants to get after Job, because he wants to compare Job's sinfulness to God's righteousness. And so what he wants to do is say sinful maggots is maybe what he would say. Yeah, so yeah, Son of Man there is not referencing maybe like, because Jesus referred to himself as Son of Man quite a bit. There it's just a generic, and again, it's a poem, it's a repetition. He's trying to say the same thing in a different way. So he's saying man, then Son of Man. Yeah, Michael. Right. Exactly. Right. Yeah. Right. So you're thinking the reference to the maggots there is sort of a passive admission maybe of what he knows is true of people. Yeah. Right. No, that could be. Yeah. I think here's the thing, and here's what we see that is really great about Scripture, is Scripture recognizes that that we ruined creation through our sin, and that we're sinners. We've rebelled against God, but it doesn't take away our made in the image of God. And so it's what has happened is Bildad has shifted from the reality of the human condition, which is true for Job too. Job is a sinner, and shifted this to an identity which is based not on the image of God. And now if Job is a maggot before God, the only point of reference then is God. So then the question is, maybe this was your question, would God consider Job a maggot? No, and why do we know that's not why? Yeah, first of all, God said he's blameless, but I don't think God would describe anyone as a maggot, even those who are not believers. First of all, he created him in the image of God. The biggest thing is he sent Jesus. And Jesus didn't come as a maggot. And so we have this view of humans by God that is a view of love and affection that comes out of being made in his image. And I think Bildad has missed the mark from what we like to, what we say is total depravity, which is man has sinned and so therefore needs complete remake and renewal. And now he's taken it worse, and now he said, and he's redefining us as really the lowest. See, if only he had. Right, see, Mrs. Pruitt would say you're made in the image of God. And Mrs. Pruitt isn't here to defend herself anymore, obviously, but she may have been there when Bildad was. No, I'm kidding. Mrs. Pruitt has been around for a very long time, or what, now she can hopefully talk to Bildad himself. And Bildad, you missed it on the maggot thing. This is where theology is hard. Is he gets the point right. Are humans separated from God and ruined? Yes. But it misses the point that humans still being made in the image of God have a sense of, the word I'm grabbing is dignity. I don't know if that's the right word. But that's God has a view of us that's particular. Yeah. And again, I would hesitate to say it's valuable because of what we bring to the table. It's not. It's because of how he made us in his image. So what we bring that God values is the way we image him. And Bildad has missed that. Okay, let's summarize just briefly, not just this chapter, but this was just a potpourri of things that came out of my head as I was thinking about the three friends. Because we're done with the three friends. The three amigos, whatever we might want to call them. Three stooges. We like the stooges. The stooges might not like that, but here we go. Number one, the friends assume any suffering is a clear indication of the presence of sin. So that's the approach of all three friends. So the question is not whether or not Job has sinned. The question is, what has he done? Because he's suffering. Their theology, their arguments with Job have no room for the suffering of the righteous or the flourishing of the wicked. So their theology says the righteous don't suffer and the wicked always flounder. And we discussed this in a couple of different spots. Even though a brief look at the world around us makes it quite clear that's not the case. There are lots and lots of people who lead otherwise righteous lives seeking the Lord, who are encountering significant suffering, and we know lots and lots of people who have rebelled against God overtly and are enjoying great prosperity. But their theology is such that anyone who is suffering is obviously not righteous, and anyone who is flourishing obviously is. So that's how they're arguing to Job. Now, what we would say theologically is all righteous people in the end will not suffer. Isn't that true? Right. But that's not going to be true for every day of the week or even half day. So we can't say if I'm good in the morning, I'm going to have a good afternoon. That was something when we were in Israel. We were having a conversation with our tour guide. Billy, was that it, Pam? It almost escaped me. So it was the morning we were going up to Masada, and some of us were smart enough to get up really early and hike up it. And Billy was sitting there talking to us as we were waiting for the breakfast things to show up. And we were talking about prayers. You got to get up and do morning prayers. He's a Muslim. You got to get up and do morning prayers. If I don't get up and do morning prayers, it'll ruin my whole day. And so that's the theology of Bildad, is I've got to be righteous to keep my day from getting ruined. And a proper theological understanding is I could pray all morning, all afternoon, read my Bible. I could still have a terrible day. Yeah, well, it is. All works-based religions are a form of karma. That's the modern sort of notion of it, including legalistic righteousness among Christians. So this is Bildad's point of view. It's worth mentioning because all of the friends' points of view are the natural human bent. So we sort of naturally bend towards when bad things happen. We start thinking the laundry. What I do wrong, and I'm trying to confess all my sin. And because I've got to get it fixed so God doesn't smite me anymore. Or if things go really, really well, we give God a tip of the hat credit. For the most part, it's because I kept my nose clean, so I was blessed. And those are dangerous ways to walk. Okay, second things about the friends. The friends think that Job is out of line to ask for justice and an audience with God. So Job is suffering, and the friends believe he's out of line for seeking audience with God and seeking an answer from God from why this is happening and seeking justice. In their view, everything that happens in life is the result of God's judgment. So the only thing Job should be doing is confessing and repenting in hopes that God would reverse his judgment. And so they think Job is completely out of line in asking God for justice and understanding God. Now, Job has made some mistakes, and God is going to lay those out. But asking for an audience was not one of those mistakes. That was probably the best thing he did. All right, third thing, the friends see Job's relationship with God as a relationship of enemies. So Job and God are in opposition to one another. That's how the friends see Job because of his suffering. Obviously, he's an enemy of God. So therefore, Job's desire to have an audience of God is stupid, because why would you want to have audience with an enemy that you know you can't beat? So that's their line of reasoning. You're opposed to God, so why would you want audience with God? Because God is just going to destroy you as an evildoer. So Job shouldn't seek, nor would he be able to stand in God's presence. That's the friend's perspective. Remember, all of this is just based on the fact that he is suffering. That his kids are dead, his commonwealth's gone, and he's got pussy sores. You must be an enemy of God. The last one we sort of already mentioned, but when we look at their speeches, including the one today, if we could sort of pull most of these speeches out of a conversation with a guy who's nearly dead, their theology might be pretty reasonable and in some ways encouraging. Like I said, this speech from Bildad, if he were just sitting around having a conversation about what he believed, this is maybe not the maggot and worm stuff. Maybe he went a little bit too far there. But the idea that God has dominion and he's powerful and he can't be opposed and he's righteous, these are all really cool things. And so the thing is, they take their theology and they apply it in sort of a brutish way to Job's situation. They have no concern for Job because they consider him an enemy of God and a sinner, nor do they really understand how God works in the world, because they think if you sin, you're going to get smited, and if you don't sin, you're going to be blessed. And that's not how the world works. So that's how these friends have been approaching this conversation with Job throughout this whole time. And when we get to the end, when God is talking to the friends, he's going to help them come correct a little bit about their theology. Any other thoughts you had on the friends before we move on to Job's speech? All right. Who would want a friend like that? I'm not sure. All right, the beginning, let's look at Job's final speech. We're starting here. This is chapter 26, and we'll work through this. Let's see, how much did I don't know how brief we're going to be. I have like 17 pages. Okay, well, here we go. Let's hurry. We'll read the first 4 verses. He responds to Bildad specifically, and really, really classic. Here we go. Job answered Bildad and said, "How you have helped him who has no power." Now, I sometimes say this on the platform because I don't know if people catch it. The sarcasm light is supposed to be illuminated. This is just sarcasm. This is just him letting Bildad know he does not appreciate it. So, how you have helped him who has no power. He doesn't actually think he's been helped, right? We understand how sarcasm works. Okay. How you have saved the arm that has no strength. How you have canceled him who has no wisdom, and plentifully declared sound knowledge. Job's in a bad mood. With whose help have you uttered these words, and whose breath has come out from you? Where did you read these brilliant sayings? I'd love to check that book out at the library or buy it on Amazon. This is incredible, Bildad. I mean, he just dripping with sarcasm. So just very, very, very briefly, look at some of it. Has Bildad helped Job who is powerless? And the answer is no. Because basically he said if Job is powerless, if God showed up, he'd be dead. So not only did he not help the powerless, he just sort of tried to reaffirm that Job is powerless. And Bildad offered no means for Job to experience redemption before this God that's going to crush him. What did Job do when his children sinned? He prayed for them. He offered sacrifices for them. He searched out for means for his children to experience a redemptive relationship with God. Bildad is like a fundamentalist preacher, old tent revival guy. Maybe you went to these when you were, and he gets up to the hellfire and brimstone and then ends the sermon. You're a sinner. You're going to hell and you're going to burn forever because of your evil deeds. And then he walks out of the building. I mean, he didn't even get to the part where he talks about Jesus dying on the cross, so you can escape the fires of hell. And he doesn't get to that. He just shuts down and leaves. That's Bildad, and which is terrible because the offering is after the invitation. He doesn't know how this works. I'm kidding. I don't know. So that's Bildad here. He tells him all about how he's ruined as a sinner and offers no means of help. That's just terrible. Verse 3. Has Bildad offered any new information? No, Bildad treats Job like an idiot. The way Bildad talks to Job, in fact, all the friends, talk to Job like he's a complete moron. Job's theology throughout the entire book, although tainted with or maybe informed by a bad attitude, that's what I might say. Job has good theology with a bad attitude, which I like, because I think we all have good theology with bad attitudes. Whereas Bildad is just being a brute with his theology. So, Bildad has offered no information. Job's theology and understanding of God is much more comprehensive. Understands much more deeply the complexity of a holy God working in a broken world. He doesn't understand it totally. That's why he wants to talk to God. But he understands it better than Bildad does. Bildad, he says at the end, how have you plentifully declared sound knowledge? Bildad has not been plentiful or sound at all. So his knowledge has been sort of a repeated argument and not a terribly sound argument. Verse 4, where did Bildad get his wisdom? That's what he says. What book did you read? I've got to check this out, says sarcastically. Now, I don't think Job at this point knows about the conversation between God and the devil. But we've mentioned this before. Where did Bildad get his wisdom? I might make this observation. Bildad's arguments sound more like Satan's arguments than God's discussion of Job. So if you look at Satan's argument at the beginning, that's what the friends sound like. And so the question is, where are you getting these arguments? The answer for us, sort of from behind the curtain, who can see it, the answer he's getting them, these are really devilish. Which is really interesting, since we might say his theology is good. But you know what? When Jesus was tempting Jesus in the wilderness, how good was when Jesus was tempting Jesus? When the devil was tempting Jesus in the wilderness, his theology wasn't terrible. He quoted verses, and the verses meant what they were supposed to mean, but he just misunderstood how you're supposed to understand it. Jesus understood, of course, he's God. No, you don't just try and paint God into a corner and force him to do your bidding. That's what Satan wanted to do. So good theology does not mean you're not being satanic. How's that? Because it's really about understanding what is God up to. And Bildad didn't understand that. He just wanted to crush his friend. All right, let's look at verses 5 through 14. I'm going to read them. It's relatively brief, and then we'll conclude. 5 through 14. The dead tremble under the waters and their inhabitants. Sheol is naked before God, and Abaddon has no covering. He stretches out the north over the void and hangs the earth on nothing. He binds up the waters in his thick clouds, and the cloud is not split open under them. He covers the face of the full moon and spreads over it his cloud. He's inscribed a circle on the face of the waters at the boundary between light and darkness. The pillars of heaven tremble and are astounded at his rebuke. By his power he stilled the sea. By his understanding he shattered Rahab. By his wind the heavens were made fair. His hand pierced the fleeing serpent. Behold, these are but the outskirts of his ways, and how small a whisper do we hear of him. But the thunder of his power, who can understand? Okay, verses 5 through 6, he talks about the grave. So what Job is going to do in chapter 26, and one commentator that I read and I appreciate about, he said chapter 26, other than God's speeches, is the best section of Job in the whole book. I don't know. I don't read Hebrew poetry, so I couldn't tell you. But Job is here basically talking about God. Bildad tried to talk about God, and Job says you're not helpful, sarcastically. Job does it here, and he does a much better job of helping us understand God. So verses 5 and 6, there's 3 words for the grave. Waters, that's one of the words often used for the grave. Sheol, obviously, is one we're very familiar with. And then Abaddon, however you pronounce it. So verses 5 and 6, he wants us to understand something about God. God sees those who are in the grave, and he sees them in their fullness. So if say, is God in charge of life? Yes. Is God in charge when you're dead? Yes. God is always in charge everywhere. His dominion goes from life to death and back and forth. He's everywhere there needs to be. And even those who have died don't escape God's gaze. That's how impressive God is. In fact, you can look up later Revelation 14:10. It's that point where those who have rebelled against God during the Great Tribulation are being cast into the lake of fire. The phrase that I find terribly disturbing, but it's in your Bible, so what are you going to do? They're cast in the lake of the fire in the presence of the Lamb. So here you have a great picture of what Job is describing. God, and remember the Lamb in Revelation is from chapters 4 and 5. The Lamb came out looking like he was slain. So this is the slain Lamb, and those who have rejected the Lamb are now suffering for their rejection of the Lamb. They're suffering eternal condemnation because they reject the Lamb. That's what Revelation is all about. But to the point Job is making, this shows us God is there when we're alive. Is Jesus with us today? Absolutely, by his Spirit. Is Jesus with us when we're dead? Yes, we see that in the book of Revelation. So Job here understands how God works much better than Bildad does. There's not a time where you won't be under the watchful eye of God. The question is, what will that eye look like? And so moving from here to the other side of the curtain, so to speak, you want to have settled that God is watching over you for your good through faith in Christ. So verse 7 then, he says, God has created the earth and placed it within the heavens. He stretches over the north, over the void. Now here's the thing. We're not going to get into it, so you can go check out a book if you want. There's a whole bunch of ancient mythological references in this section. We just don't have time, nor am I terribly interested. Because that's really, it adds something to it. It does. But what we want to understand is there's lots of references to the north. That's this big mountain where creation started, and there's a whole bunch of ancient mythological sort of references to the north in this mountain, where gods or the gods, chief gods, and they're always tussling with one another. You know how this goes. And what Job has done is he's co-opted all these mythologies. He said, no, that's God. And he said, if you have a God he's not, it's this God is the creator. This God is the one who's done it. And so God from highest heaven, that's when he refers to the north, the highest God, the one true God, the God of the highest heaven, has created earth, and he has created the heavens and hung the earth. Verse 7, it says he hangs earth on nothing. And we don't need to make a big deal about it that somehow before Newton he figured out space and gravity. Because up to this point in history, most ancients believed that the planets were floating on water. And that's how they sort of maintained where they were in space, so to speak. So this is a little bit novel that he says God hangs it there. No, he's not talking about gravity. He's just saying God made the heavens, God made the earth, he put them together. He is in charge of this. Maybe we'd see a reference in the New Testament which says that all things in Christ have their being, they're held together by Christ. But yeah, is that Colossians? Yeah. Verse 8, God has power over the weather. He binds up the waters in thick clouds. And a cloud can go by without dropping any water. You ever had that? You see that cloud comes by, it's dark and thick, and it's going to rain, and then it doesn't. And then other times it's bright and sunny and it's raining. You're running your windshield wipers. Sunny rain. I was curious because of this cloud thing, and I was curious how much clouds weigh. So I looked it up, and people have measured this. Because clouds have mass like any other physical property. I was a little bit surprised. The average cumulus cloud, because you imagine how much water there is. Because when it rains, it's heavy. When it hits you. The average cumulus cloud, I don't know how big average cumulus is. That's the big puffy ones. 1 million pounds. It's made out of water. Like if you put enough water over this city that you could put an inch of water on it's all water. Yeah, now it's taking up a huge amount of space, and you can. I got bored, so you can go figure out how much it is per square feet. But it wouldn't be much per square foot, obviously. But once you've got a massive cloud that might be a couple of miles high and a couple of miles wide, you've got 1 million gallons of water, or 1 million pounds of water floating over, and which is pretty incredible just to think of it. And what Job is saying, God does that. He can decide to let that 1 million pound cloud just fly on by. And he's saying this is what God does. God's in charge of the weather. You can look over in Matthew chapter 5. You're familiar with the verse. I love what Jesus says. God makes it rain on the righteous and the unrighteous alike. When it rains on both, just because he's a good guy. So God has power over the weather, not the weather, excuse me. Verse 9, he covers the face of the full moon and spreads over it its cloud. It's a bit of a sort of a reversal of creation, because when God made creation, he said, let there be lights. He pointed to 2 lights in the sky, one to govern the day, one to govern the night. And here we have it at night, it's covered. And God can do that. We have eclipses that happen, and then, of course, it can get very dark. Or around here, we have a wildfire, and it can get very dark. Now, so there's 2 ways of translating a word that's translated moon, so I'm going to give you both. One is moon, and what it means is God, if he wants to, can cover the moon and make the night dark, which is sort of an allusion to the evil. Because at night, that's when evil stuff happens, and the moon is to govern the night and give it light. And God can cover that, and if he wants, and so evil happens. But that word can also be translated throne. Again, I'm not a Hebrew scholar. If it's throne, then what we see here is this notion that God is sort of covering himself. He's sort of shielding his glory and his power and might within the cloud. And it's really hard to know which way that word ought to be translated. It seems like throne might fit because at the end of the book, when God speaks, what is he speaking out of? Speaking out of the storm. A whirlwind, but also a thunderstorm is going on. So that might fit sort of what's going to happen. But it's so if you're reading in your Bible, you use different translations. When you get to Job 26, one version might have moon, one might have throne. Not sure which one it is. Okay, verse 10. God has inscribed a circle on the face of the waters. So he's thinking about the ocean, and he's thinking about the line in the ocean that separates light and dark. And what is that line? That's the horizon. He's talking about and he's not a flat earther. Okay, he's not saying the earth is a disc. What he's saying is God is the one who has established these lines. Now, you have to remember in the ancient world, when we look across the ocean, we stand on Harris Beach and look across the ocean. I know Japan's over there somewhere. They can have an earthquake over here, and we can have a wave over here. So there's a connection. I know it's over there, but that's not really been the case for most of human history. You look across the ocean, you say, wonder what's out there. I have no idea what's over there. I mean, this Columbus guy thought he could sail to India, but he didn't realize there was something in the way. There's quite a bit of land out there. So the view of the sea in the ancient mind was the sea was that stood for uninhabitable space. There was nothing controllable. It was many times in ancient writings it's referred to sort of as the chaos. That's just where there's no order, no control. And what Job is saying is here you have this space that most people say in the ancient world, anything out there is just psycho, just crazy. And what Job is saying, yeah, God's in charge of all that. All the chaos that we would see in the sea, or they would see that God is there, he created. God has already been to the horizon and back several times. He knows all about what's going on out there. Everything is in God's hands, even in the one thing in the ancient world which seemed completely unconquerable. For the ancient person traveling across the ocean, it would have been no different than our thoughts of going to the moon. At a certain point that would have seemed crazy. Of course, now once you've done it, it's, we went to the moon. But it would have been no different. This notion, are you saying maybe it was Eastern Oregon? Yeah, they landed. I've seen lunar parts in Eastern Oregon. It could have been. Yeah, maybe a flag stuck. I'm not kidding. So that's what they viewed of this ocean. And what Job is saying is he's all over that. God's all in that. He created it. There's nothing out there that's a mystery to him. Verse 11, the pillars of heaven tremble and are astounded at his rebuke. Heaven itself trembles at the sound of God's voice. The foundations of heaven, there's sort of this idea that the foundations of heaven were mountains, and maybe even mountains on earth. So you have these mountains, and on top of them are heaven, and God's in heaven. And then when he gets rowdy, when he gets riled up, the foundations of heaven would shake. I mean, that's pretty rare. If you can shake heaven, you're doing something, right? And so when God rebukes in heaven, they shake. This is a really important thing to recognize, that God is God, and his judgment is to be considered. And his while on the one hand he seeks personal connection and relationship with us, at the same time he's still immense. And I don't know if you've ever been to places where you've been to something so large it sort of gives you queasies. I get that way if I'm standing on something that's very, very tall, and you just go, wow, that is so huge, and it just sort of, but God is so much more than that. In fact, on that note, the tabernacle and the temple, these two things functioned as the center of worship for the people of Israel, and sort of this is the place where God was. We tend to think that the curtain in the tabernacle was to keep people out, because you can't go into where God is because you die. But what's interesting when you look at Revelation 11, it's after the seventh trumpet. The seventh trumpet sounds, and then it says something interesting. God has gotten up, and he's coming out of heaven's temple. And what's happening with the trumpets? And you got the seals, and then you got the trumpets, and then you got the bowls. You have the judgment of God. And so God is coming out of his temple to execute the final judgment for sin, coming out of heaven's temple. And it reminds me of in Psalm 78:65, it says, because all these bad things have been happening, and the psalmist says, when God are you going to awake? And then he says, God is going to awaken like a warrior awakened from his stupor, which I think is an interesting way of talking about God. So basically, a warrior goes to sleep drunk, and then wakes up, somebody smacks him on the shoulder. We got to fight, man. He wakes up, and he's hungover, and he doesn't know what's going on, and then now he's mad. He's got a bit of a headache, and he was trying to sleep it off, and the psalmist sort of compares God to a warrior suddenly coming out. Okay, now you really don't want to cross this guy, because now he's really riled up. And so in Revelation, you have God coming out of his temple. So the temple wasn't there, I think, to keep us out. It was to keep him in. Because what happens in any moment if God shows up in his fullness on this, it's just smoked. It's just, you're just done. So the temple really was the place where God could be in that sense. And that's why it's even more incredible that the Bible describes us as the temple now. because we have the Holy Spirit in us. That would not be possible if we had not been made righteous. That just simply would not be a possibility for us to exist as the temple of God with the Holy Spirit indwelling us if something fundamentally hadn't changed. So this is how God is described. He's in his domain in heaven, and when he rebukes, it rattles. Okay, verse 12. We're almost done. A few more descriptions of God, and then we'll finish. Verse 12. God stills the sea. By his power, he stilled the sea. He's not talking about, the Red Sea. He's not talking about Jesus on the Sea of Galilee. I mean, that could be sort of a precursor to it. I don't have a problem with that. But what he is saying here is, when you look out at the ocean, this chaos, he is God who goes out and he's in charge. There's nothing out there. He has shattered Rahab. This is the sea monster. God's going to refer to the Leviathan when he's talking. And there's lots of different ways this is used. Again, this is one of these places where Job is using mythological things from the ancient world to show that God is. This Rahab is sort of a stand-in maybe for the devil, this notion of ruler of the seas, this chaos where everything's just unbounded, and God goes out there, calms it, kills the leader of it. You know, God's in charge of it. This is God's powerful hand, coming out of sort of an ancient mythological viewpoint. He just goes out and takes care of it. It's not even hard. You know, these ancient stories of the sea and its chaotic nature and this evil ruler Rahab, the sea creature, and God just goes out, oh, stop. And then it's just over. This is how Job is painting the power of God. One other thing on this, and this is just an aside for you to chew on. New heavens and new earth in Revelation 21, there is no sea. And so many commentators argue, now, because I just got to be honest, I want to have an audience with God. Explain to me something. I want a beach in heaven. That's part of the deal. How are we going to not go to the beach if there's no ocean? There's no sea. There's just not a sea. Maybe, yeah. We can have a beach, there's no sea. We could call it something different in heaven. I don't know. But one of the viewpoints of that is it may not be describing a body of water. It's an allusion back to this and other texts that sort of communicate this ocean is the place of chaos. And in heaven, there will be none of that. It will all be order. It will all be the rulership of God everywhere. There won't be any place in heaven where you would go and you would not know immediately God has intentionally been here and it's completely in his order. And that could be kind of the way there. I got to look at one thing. Okay, verse 13. By his wind the heavens were made fair. His hand pierced the fleeing serpent. So in the final battle at the end of time, God is going to win. There is no dispute, and it's not close. It's not a competition. It's not Satan never had a chance. There was never going to be an issue. The reason this is important, that he has made heavens fair and he pierced the fleeing serpent, meaning ended all enemies permanently, is in most ancient mythologies, if you've studied any, it's a tussle. All these gods are always competing, and one has this power and one has this power, and they're always sort of fighting over who gets what and who controls what. And this is normal. What's that? You can fight over dominion. God is not a part of that. That is not what God is doing. He's not one of the gods who's sort of tussling over dominion. He is the one true God, the high God, and he's just in charge. And any enemy will just be dispatched. Any enemy who isn't immediately dispatched, like us or the devil, it's simply because we serve his purpose to not be. For us to have an opportunity to be redeemed, the enemy, Satan, for some reason, serves a purpose in the working out of that redemptive plan. This is really, really what happens. This is what happens in Exodus when you have the plagues. Because each of those plagues were showing how God, just with the simplest of no energy expended, could defeat one of the gods of Egypt. Each one sort of knocks over a god of Egypt. And it's not even a close competition. And this is connected with God is the creator. Who wrote Genesis? By the power of the Holy Spirit. Moses. And who wrote Exodus? By the power of the Holy Spirit. Moses. So do you think when he was writing the creation account, he intentionally sort of forgot Exodus? No, because the argument was to Pharaoh, this is the God, the creator. So God who creates out of nothing is now going to let you know you're pretend gods that aren't gods. Either they're non-existent or they are demonic forces, one of the two. God is not, these are not things to him. It's just, stop it. You want frogs? Fine, here's some frogs. And then Pharaoh, take the frogs away. Okay, now you got piles of frogs. I don't know which is better, piles of dead frogs or live frogs. I don't know which is worse. So God wins, and he's wants you. Now, just to keep going to connect it with how it ends in the book of Revelation, the Exodus from Egypt is a taste of Revelation. So Exodus says, look, your gods are nothing, but it's just, here's a little taste. I mean, it was nothing. Because Revelation is God finally stepping into human history and saying, your gods are nothing. And this is really important because Pharaoh thought he was a god, and he didn't measure up. Now, the Antichrist is going to think is a god, and he's going to have lots and lots and lots of power. And what Job is saying here very, very early on is, look, God, he just stabs the serpent. He just pierces the serpent. There's no power here because the only God who has actual power is the one true God, the creator God. And this is what Job understands. Now, is there an allusion here to Jesus being pierced? Maybe you might think that. You see, I don't know. I don't necessarily think that Job is making a redemptive allusion to Jesus, the Messiah, being crucified. However, I think it's interesting. I think it's interesting that Satan thought he defeated Christ on the cross, but really Satan was defeated at the cross. And so you have this inverse. So if I want to, how do I say it this way? I don't think the message of Job is trying to make an allusion to the piercing of Christ actually being a piercing of Satan. I don't think you can defend that. But if you don't think of that when you're reading this, you need to read some more. Yeah, I think the enemy is defeated, and he was defeated at the cross. That's where the defeat occurred. Okay, last verse 14, and then we'll do some application very briefly. Behold, these are but the outskirts of his ways. How small a whisper do we hear of him, but the thunder of his power, who can understand? I love this. If you had to sit down and write, describe God for me? Would you come up with this? Would you come with something even close? Am I right? God is love. This is an incredible description of God. I might challenge you this week. Maybe pull it out a couple times this week. Just read it, to be reminded of what God is like. Job gets to the end of this. Like I said, what one scholar says is, other than the poetry of God at the end of the book, the single greatest poem in the book of Job, and this is just the outskirts. This is, if you took God and you traced an outline around him and just had the outline, that's what you've got from my description here. So he's saying, here's this very profound description of God, and I'm not even getting at it right. I'm not even getting all the details right. The shading's not right. I'm not hitting it, which I think is really, really incredible. It also tells us why heaven will never be boring, because we will never stop discovering what God is like. We will always be filling in that outline. All right, 3 applications, and then we're done. Do I have 3? Yeah. But then, look how long each one is, Ralph. That's not, I don't even know why I number them. God is creator is the primary biblical argument that God alone is God. So if you look at the arguments that God alone is the one true God, the argument you're going to see the most is God is creator. And we've said this many, many times. So when you're reading Genesis 1, 2, and 3, you are not, Moses, by the power of the Holy Spirit, did not put the creation account in there to tell you how it was created. It was put in there to tell you who created it, to the exclusion of all other gods. No other God created it. Only God created it, and whoever is the creator is the one true God, and there's no other gods. That's it. And so that's the primary argument. Read John 1:1. John 1, in the beginning was the Word was with God, the Word was God. Without him, nothing was made that has been made. So that's the argument for Jesus' deity. from John at the beginning of the book is not his miracles. John's first argument for Jesus is God is he's the creator. And you're going to see that a lot in the Bible. There is no competition between God and other devils and demons. There's no competition. It's not close. There are no spiritual forces. There is only, you either worship the one true God and have right relationship with him, or you are condemned. Those are the only two options for all of creation. You either worship the one true God who is creator, or you are condemned. God is not threatened by anyone. Like, nobody makes him worried. There's nothing that gets him riled up in terms of concern. And it's only by his mercy that he allowed us to continue living. In fact, I think Peter makes that argument. Why is God delaying? So that we might have a greater opportunity to experience salvation through faith in Christ. So how does that influence us as Christians? God does not order anything in any way other than according to what he's doing. So God's ordering of the world is only in reference to what he's up to. So this is what's really bothering Job. Because Job doesn't like how God is ordering things, right? But the way God orders the world is only defined by how he has decided to do it according to him. So that means our place, what is happening to us, what God is doing, how he made us, the circumstance we find ourselves in, are fundamentally designed not to be ordered around how we would order things, but what he's up to. Now, in our sinful nature, that bothers us because we want to be the center of the story of our life. But what Job is going to discover, and what we discover since God is the creator, is we're better fit as creatures. We experience more fullness of relationship with God when we see our role as fitting into what he's up to. And that's going to be a key element of understanding suffering. Because suffering, if it's just me having to plod through it, it's kind of a pain. But if my suffering has meaning because it fits into something that God is doing, that can be one important way that we can have some endurance through it. Is God orders things according to his purpose. Now, we're not going to deal with it tonight, maybe on another night, but, why would God do something that seems evil? And, we can struggle with that another. But what God did to Job, was it evil? Well, no, because God did it. Because God did it. And now, it wasn't comfortable, it wasn't fun, and I wish it wouldn't have happened. I hope it doesn't happen to any of us and all that kind of stuff. But God does order things in particular ways, and it's always in reference to him. Now, thankfully, when you read the Bible, one of the ways God orders things is by perceiving the hardship others feel. God is constantly, throughout the Old Testament, seeing people's hardship, and his compassion is moved, and he responds. So it's not that he's cold and calculating, but everything is ordered according to his plan. Okay, second thing. Yeah, Michael. Yeah. Yep, that's fine. Correct. That's right. Yeah, he's routinely doing that all the time. It's fantastic. And same thing with us, is we'll do things that are evil, and God will use them for good. So secondly, we talked about this just a little bit. Suffering should then be seen as one of the ways, there's many ways, but it's one of the ways that God accomplishes his purposes. So suffering is one of the ways God accomplishes his purpose. So when we're praying through suffering, one of the things we often pray about is very similar to Job. We're trying to finally get God to see our suffering the way we see it, which it's lame and we want it to end. That's sort of our perspective on our suffering, is that suffering is terrible and we want it to end. That's a right perspective. You should want suffering to end. But what is better, I think, broadly, especially suffering that requires that's longer than a week, is to begin to see that God's up to something, that God's in it. That it doesn't necessarily make the pain less or the frustration less, but if God is in this, then what I want to do over the course of time, by God's grace, meaning looking at his word, counsel of good friends, not friends like these yahoos, but good friends, is to begin to try and look at my suffering from the point of view of what is God up to. Okay, what's God up to? And if you don't understand, that's fine. That's often the case. But instead of pursuing a life of trying to get God to see stuff from our perspective, one of the ways we can aid our suffering is to try through prayer and word and good counsel, how can I see this from God's perspective? And maybe by his grace, he gives you some perspective on that. Sometimes God does that. You hear stories, people, long years of suffering, and then finally it ends, and they see what happened. Something beautiful happened out of it. That doesn't always happen, though. Sometimes the story ends for us, and we never really saw what happened from it. And so one of the ways we can appreciate what God is doing is in the habit of suffering, is learning to try and see things from God's point of view. What is he up to here? What is he trying to do in my life? What is he trying to do in the lives of the people around me? How can I see this instead of merely through the eyes of how can I get this to the end? How do I appreciate what God is doing? We don't minimize the pain of it. I hope it doesn't. I'm not saying that. We would do this on the other side. You know, if we were experienced great blessing, you know, if you won the lottery, I don't know if you played the lottery, you win a whole bunch of money or something. Now, you'll know suffering then, but anyway, if you win it, most of the time what we're going to do, boy, I won all this money, and I really want to see things from God's ways. Yeah, I would hope we would say that. This really fantastic thing has happened, so therefore, boy, I really need to buckle down, see things from God's perspective, and how can I use this prosperity for the kingdom of God? Wouldn't that be a normal thing to do? So why wouldn't we do that with suffering? And so why wouldn't we in the same? So God has decided by his kindness, because remember, John and Peter got flogged in Acts, and they were so ecstatic. They got to be treated like Jesus. So, but with suffering, we don't give ourselves that opportunity because it sucks. I don't know how to say that nice. I don't know if I'm allowed to say. I finally had to tell my kids to stop saying that. They weren't saying it right. The emphasis was wrong. With suffering, though, we can do that. Oh, man, I've been given this fantastic suffering. Boy, it is really, really terrible. So what can I do? What is the kingdom orientation of this? Now, I don't know what that is. I don't know how to answer that for each of us as individuals. I can tell you, though, that over the course of time, that's going to be a greater way to shepherd your own soul than merely looking for suffering to end. I would hope suffering ends. We should pray for that. Don't get me wrong. But long term, how do I shepherd my own soul towards the glory of Christ? Is I say, how can I see this from God's perspective? And we should admit that we don't like that. We want God to see stuff from our way, just like Job did. Finally, this. We talked a lot about the immensity of God. God's immensity does not make him less accessible. In fact, God's massiveness makes him more accessible. Since we know that God is involved in every detail of creation, everything that's ever been discovered by scientists, no matter how small a thing they look at under how small a microscope or how fast a particle they send through an impact collider, every time they discovered that, God's response is always the same. Finally, I made that thing a long time ago. I made that thing. And so now you've finally got something at the bottom of the ocean to see a fish that glows in the dark. You didn't know about this? This thing has been around the whole time. So God's immensity, because he is involved in such detail, he is so immense that he creates the smallest details of everything, means he is accessible. Because don't you ever wonder how, when we all get to heaven, can we all be that close to one person? Right? Don't you ever thought there's going to be millions and millions, maybe billions of people there? How are we all? Because he's God. No other person can pull that off. Because of his immense, it doesn't make him less accessible. It actually makes him more so. Okay, let me close in prayer. Sorry if we went late. I always say I'm sorry to make it seem like I am. Yes, suffering. Ken is sitting here. God has something in this, but I don't know what it is. All right. God, we thank you for your kindness you have shown us, that you sent us Jesus, and we can see him by faith and receive salvation. God, we would pray for each one of us in the individual ways in which we encounter difficulty and suffering in our lives. We would ask God that first of all, Lord, that you would see fit to end it, that you would provide the means to move from suffering to rest. But Lord, if not, we would ask you would have our eyes open to what you are accomplishing through it, that we would experience the joy of seeing our story fit into the glory that is the kingdom of God. So we thank you for your love. In Jesus' name, amen. All right, have a good night. See you next week.